Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be talking about slow growing crested geckos. Now this seems like a comment I've been getting a lot recently. It seems like everyone's like, oh, my gecko's a year old and smaller than yours, or what should I do, my gecko isn't growing. And I thought, I'm kind of having this same problem myself right now, so I was like, let's make a video on it. Before we get into this though, I wanted to mention quickly that I've missed a couple uploads on Friday. I know I was trying to do Monday and Friday. Basically the reason behind that is I'd rather make one really good video than two kind of ones. So if I'm skipping days, it's just so I can work harder on one video rather than two. Because as they say, quality is always better than quantity. And I believe in that. So that's why I've been skipping a couple Fridays. I hope to have maybe a new video out this Friday. But if I don't, I apologize. Anyway, you guys are here to learn about slow growing crested geckos today. And now it's actually funny because everyone's been commenting me that, and this is happening to me right now. So I'm going to touch base briefly on why this could be happening to you, but I don't want to talk about it too much just because I've already talked about it in my other videos, so I thought we'd just run over it quickly. So one of the main things, probably the main thing, if your gecko is growing slow, has to do with the care. Now, as far as care goes, you want to make sure that they are having a good diet, and what I mean by that is, what are they eating? Having a gecko that's only eating watermelon Pangea is going to grow a lot slower than a crested gecko that's eating Pangea with bugs or Pangea and bugs. So you should keep in mind during this entire video what you're feeding your gecko, because that's pretty much what it's going to come down to in the end. But there are a couple other things. Another big one is how warm is it in your house? In my house, it's roughly about 75 degrees right now or so, and it is the winter. So in summer, I'm sure it gets a couple degrees warmer probably. But if you're somewhere living cold, you might want to think about getting a little extra heat just to keep them a little bit warmer, and it'll make them grow a little bit faster, hopefully. Something to also note is, like I said here, it's winter right now. Generally speaking, what I've noticed is that even though it can be the same degrees inside, if it gets colder outside, my geckos tend to grow slower and not want to eat as much bug meals or bugs in general. So that's kind of why they might be growing a little bit slower right now, and maybe that's why I'm getting so many comments of it. But that's just something to keep in mind. But if it's somewhere where it stays nice year round, you might have one of these other problems. Another thing is the humidity. Humidity is important for your geckos. If you're keeping it too dry or too wet, neither of those are good. You kind of want a happy medium. You should be getting it moist at night and then having it dry out. And then if you want, maybe a little bit in the morning, depending on how dry it is where you live. But usually I just do one at night, and that seems to work out great for my geckos. So humidity is an important thing, but you shouldn't get bent out of shape over it. And another important thing is basically just the genetics of your gecko. Some geckos are just going to grow slower than others, and there's nothing you can really do about that. And this might be the case for some of you. Some of you might just have other care issues, but genetics are something to consider. They do play a role, obviously, in how fast your gecko is going to grow. And that's just something to keep in mind. The final thing I have as far as maybe what care is affecting your gecko is what size tank your gecko is in. This is probably one that bothers me the most. I don't know why, but if you have a small little gecko, please don't put it in a big tank like an 18 by 18 by 24 for a little new hatchling crested gecko. That just is a bad idea. And some of you might be like, well, in the wild they have the entire world to roam around, and you're right. But this isn't the wild, and we're trying to get our geckos to grow, so please don't put your little gecko through that, living in a big tank trying to find the food. And in theory, if your gecko is in a big tank like that, as long as they're eating and pooping, your gecko is fine growing-wise, supposedly, although I would still not recommend putting them in a big tank. Generally speaking, I like to keep them in a smaller tank rather than a larger tank, at least until they're an adult. Then you can move them pretty much into what you would like. But when they're growing up, I really don't like keeping them in super big tanks like that. I think a shoebox size for a baby is perfect, or a critter keeper, and then maybe move them up to something like 16 quarts when they're a juvenile, and then like 32 or bigger when they're an adult. I keep all my adults in a 32 quart, and that might seem small, but I also have a couple adults in 64 quart tubs, and that seems too big. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. I think the 32 quarts are perfect. You may disagree with that, but all my geckos are growing at a steady pace. So let's say you get through this and all your care seems great. You seem like you're doing everything right, and your gecko is still not growing. You still have a slow growing crested gecko. I'll just tell you guys what I'm doing with mine. If you guys don't know who I'm talking about Hyde here in this video. I'll put a picture of him so you guys can see who I'm talking about here. Hyde's kind of a funny little guy. I got him in June of 2018 as a 7-gram juvenile. Now, Hyde was actually born in November, late November, so we could just call it December basically. So from December to June, which is roughly 7 months or so, Hyde only weighed 7 grams. So that's pretty small for a 7-month-old gecko, at least in my opinion. But, he wasn't in my care, so I can't really do anything about that. I wanted to get him growing a little bit bigger because by the time he was a year old, he was only going to be like 10 grams if he kept on the same rate of growth. So I had a special plan for Hyde because Hyde didn't seem to like crickets. Now, if you're not feeding your gecko bugs, your gecko is going to grow slower. You should just expect that. Although one thing you can do if you're truly against bugs is buy some Pangea growth and breeding formula. That will at least help boost it up and hopefully get them on the growing spurt that they need. And that's what I'm doing with Hyde. Hyde would always eat a couple crickets, but he didn't really like them, and I noticed that he wasn't liking them. So over the winter, I stopped giving him crickets altogether. He hasn't gotten any, and I've gotten him on growth and breeding formula every other night, or every other feeding is what I mean. So I'll give him like normal and then breeding formula, normal, breeding formula. And this just makes him get a little bit extra. He gets that insect meal in him without eating any of the crickets. And once it's summertime again, I'll probably start feeding him bugs again. I just noticed that he doesn't like his crickets as much. So maybe that's why he was growing so slow earlier. Maybe not, maybe. But he was just maybe a slow grower in general. So what I've been trying to do is just keep him on a more scheduled diet of growth formula. And this is seeming to do well, because I'll put a chart up on screen here. You may have seen this chart before, but basically I have King, Lissa, Draco, and Julia. Now, the 3 bottom ones, Lissa, Draco, and Julia, are all my 3 main geckos I use when talking about growth. I had them all around the same time. They're all around the same size. So generally when I'm talking about crested geckos growing, I like to use them just because I've had them since they were all babies, and I've grown them up till they're basically adults now. So I'm going to put Hyde in here on this chart. And as you can see, looking at Hyde at a year old or a year to where like Julia and Draco are, it's a little bit smaller, but he's growing just a little bit slower than they are. And you can see like how Lissa, who is an excellent grower compared to Hyde, can really like discourage someone when they think, maybe they have 2 geckos and one's growing super fast and the other one's growing slow. And you're getting discouraged because you think something is wrong with your gecko. And I wanted to just tell you guys that this is probably not the case. The majority of the people who I would say comment on my videos asking about small geckos are probably doing everything right, and their gecko is just simply growing slower. And this can be for a variety of reasons like I've already talked about, but for the most part I think people should just not worry about it as much. I kind of wanted to make this video talking about it just so that you guys can hopefully have some reassurance that you're doing it right and your gecko is simply just growing slow. At this point in time, Hyde is slightly more than 18 grams, I'm sure. I haven't weighed him since December. So, in the month period, he's probably about 20 grams now. But this year, he will be turning 2 years old. So, like a gecko like Lissa, who's already 50 grams at a year old, is going to be quite a bit bigger than 2-year-old Hyde. So that's just something to keep in mind. Hopefully this was somewhat helpful to you if you have a slow-growing crested gecko. The main things I can recommend is the appropriate cage size and feeding a diet healthy in bugs or growth formula to your gecko. Those 2 things alone should help your gecko start growing. And the other things I mentioned in the video are also helpful. But anyway, if you guys have any more questions or comments, please leave them down below. I really appreciate it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video.